This is ArcGIS Urban in Introduction. My name is Brooks Patrick. I lead the cross-sector team of planners, landscape architects at Esri. We work with a lot of teams across the organization. Also here today is Eric Whitner.
Hi, I'm Eric Whitner. I'm the product manager for ArcGIS Urban and CityEngine.
Yeah, so today we're going to just give you a quick overview of ArcGIS Urban. We'll actually go into a demonstration, and I'll actually pull up the plenary demonstration. We'll go through it in a little bit more detail. We'll go through some of the more, let's say, advanced workflows. We've actually been launched as of last Wednesday, and we've launched together with CityEngine. So we'll talk a little bit about CityEngine workflows as well. We know a lot of you probably in the room are familiar with that tool, and they are quite complementary. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And so to get it started, I'm just going to pull up this slide because we've been working on this tool about 2 years now, and it came about because we have noticed that a lot of our customers, our users, are facing these massive challenges. This is an image of Melbourne, actually, Australia. We were both there just about a month ago, and walking around in the streets of Melbourne, you could probably see about 4 or 5 cranes at any one time. And this is not a unique challenge to Melbourne. By all means, it's happening in all of our cities, large and small. And what we've seen is that there are a couple of stakeholder groups that just don't have a common view on these challenges. Typically, you find planning departments relying on real estate developers' illustrations as they submit for conceptual review during the permitting process. Or you have folks reaching out to citizens with wooden blocks and Legos and stickies that you want to paste on large printed out surveys, and you have also engineering companies, architecture companies, planning firms working in a non-located space, just white space, with many times very complex Revit models, for example. So we see that there are these unique challenges that can be addressed by simply providing a base map and some tools to actually both review and model different changes to development standards. And really in response to these challenges, we see this tool as becoming this support of a paradigm shift in our development model. So we have more of a unified view on what's being proposed and planned and where in the city. So we've developed ArcGIS Urban to be a browser-based tool. This is to support the practitioner. We recognize that not everyone's going to have a graphics card and nice hardware, so we do want to make this sort of a tablet first or work across all hardware available. It's inherently 3D. It's based on a 3D base map, so you can actually use both 2D GIS as well as 3D GIS in the system. And we've built in a set of planning tools into this browser-based system, so you can actually go in and do some authoring within the environment. So there's some pretty fundamental capabilities that it supports. The first and foremost is just being able to visualize projects citywide. This is the view of Boston that we had last year at the user conference. And what we're proposing is basically to leverage the different content management systems that you do have, the permitting systems, the asset management systems, and really join that to the model or the representation of that project, whether it's a new building or a new road, that you're getting from whether it's a developer or an engineering company. Many times these come in Revit, they come in SketchUp, and we want to be able to load those in and provide this overview that also supports iterations as they go through the different review processes that are really unique to the different cities and counties that we work in. The second overall capability is to improve planning productivity by actually building in a set of tools based on parcels, zones, overlays that would actually allow you to model changes to height regulations or setback regulations, floor area ratios, and being able to actually apply different building typologies to certain properties throughout the city. To test different outcomes that different regulatory policy decisions might foster at the end of the day. Case in point here in this image showing Fisherman's Bend, it's one of the largest specific plans, they call them precinct plans in Australia. And you have about 3 agencies working actively on this, about, I want to say, upwards of 25 planning staff. But you have city on the left of Melbourne, you have Port Phillip on the right, you have then the state of Victoria. And so we need this sort of very accessible browser-based system to actually provide a common environment for all agencies to work together on these scenarios that are very complex because you have so many different jurisdictions involved and different regulatory authorities as well involved. But as you can see, we're able to not only integrate the pipeline of proposed buildings in blue, which are, let's say, approved but not built, and then actually test out different scenarios beside them as of what could be produced in the regulatory environment. Really, the third capability is to just increase transparency when it comes to the permitting process. Either you find cities want to be completely transparent or not at all, because they're really maybe scared of what the public might think of some of these newer projects coming in. But we see a tool like this being able to just provide what the developer has submitted in terms of a proposed building, being able to provide that to the design council, the planning council at the local government, as well as to the public. It's going to be able to get over a lot of this fear of new development, I think. When it comes to these kind of reviews, we're also able to take a look and provide suggestions on how we might improve the overall design. Maybe the ground floor would have more of a retail or maybe more glass versus brick wall, right? But you're able to actually use the Revit model in this case to actually see what's being proposed and literally we're looking at the construction drawing essentially in the review process. And then fourth, and this is a capability that we've been working on, and it did make it into version 1, it's this ideas concept. We do want to provide a simple way for citizens as well as staff actually across different departments to provide sort of like digital sticky notes, being able to drop in comments anywhere in the city and actually note like you would on a sticky note. If anyone's been to a planning workshop at your own city, you know what I'm talking about. Sticky notes are always used. So let me go ahead and open up a demo, and we'll actually walk through it in a little bit more detail than we did on Monday. I'm going to go ahead and open it up here. Last year we actually showed Boston. So Boston in this case, when we were showing it, had a 3D base map. You had 3D buildings that showed really the larger projects, not all permitted projects, but just the larger ones that do require that extra view on the model and what is actually being submitted. So in this environment, what we're providing is this base map of the city, a 3D city model. It could be untextured, it could be textured. It really doesn't necessarily matter. It's using the ArcGIS platform and the capabilities that we have to just support any resolution. But it provides us projects, plans, indicators, and ideas as searchable categories on the left. If we open up projects, for example, we see that the icons get a little bit bigger, and we can actually search through different projects and actually, for example, go down and see them in location with context. We also have plans, which I'll get to actually in the next demo, and indicators. When it comes to indicators, we're actually going to be releasing a lot of indicators out of the box. Thanks to our Living Atlas team, we've been working with them on indicators such as population change. These are for the US extent only. We're working with some of our distributors to also have international out-of-the-box indicators. But it actually allows us this view on Esri's demographic data. If you know, it's actually forecasting 5 and 10 years down the road. What we're looking at here is the current population growth within the Boston region. So with Esri data, we can go beyond city boundaries and county boundaries and actually provide that holistic view at multiple scales. We can also have indicators that relate back to our projects, our plans, to look at proposed changes and how many, for example, jobs and population might be supported by the current building pipeline here. I'm going to switch over to Pasadena. This is an interesting case because when we talk to a lot of users, a lot of our users have specific plans that they're looking to support. And in the case of Pasadena, we have 8 overall specific plans in different parts of the city. Pasadena is relatively a medium-sized city in the U.S. For those not from here, population about 100,000 about. So what we did was we actually worked with them on South Fair Oaks. South Fair Oaks plan is a 3-year effort. Actually, all 8 are a 3-year effort. And it's really unheard of to do 8 at the same time. So they're looking to tools like this to actually support the land use conceptual development, as well as the different visuals that you can actually pull from this system to use in these public meetings. But in Urban, just like projects, you have these cards that you can format that might link back to different documents, like the zoning code, in Muni Code, for example, or different workshop material that might have been used. If we go in here, though, because I'm actually part of the organization here, because I'm logged in, we're actually able to edit the plan. So in Urban, when you start a new plan, you actually get a copy of the existing zoning, the existing parcels, all of the overlays that might exist as the system was set up. In addition to that, there are some contextual layers here. So each plan can actually have a contextual set of layers like points of interest or the metro stop here that you see. So in this case, you have existing zoning. Each of these zones is actually loaded in as a table. And so they all are described essentially by these inputs, like coverage, the color of the symbol, obviously, the FAR number, which is floor area ratio. For those here from international countries, it's FSI, floor space index. But essentially, these are the parameters that get described when looking at zoning codes, which are typically paragraphs and written out literally in words. So you have the tiers here. Tiers look at the setbacks, multi-level setbacks as well, looking at different starting heights. And then you actually have allowed space uses that you can program based on your general land use, which can either allow or not allow certain space types. So with the existing zoning, as you see here, they were actually just looking at business as usual as the first scenario, right? So under current zoning conditions, you can only build warehouses, right, in certain areas. In this case, the zoning has been set up primarily to support biotech and in really a flexible industrial, light industrial use. This is a pretty big hospital and a pretty big university campus. Actually, it's an arts campus. So just the first scenario that we typically work through when looking in Urban at these plan areas is the business as usual. What can you do under existing zoning? So all of these little colored blocks here, these are, let me select parcels, are different building types. These particular building types, if we look, this would be a low-rise light industrial, for example, but all of these can be localized similar to the zoning to actually reflect the types of buildings that are getting built in your jurisdictions or those that you might be working in. So when you go to actually propose new land use concepts, let me go ahead and zoom out a little bit here. And I'll go ahead and turn off the existing buildings and parcels so you can see it a little bit better. Here we went from existing zoning, which looked like this, to the proposed change, which looked a bit like this. So at the district level, we're able to actually modify these zoning polygons with tools here you see on the top left. You have your merge. If you wanted to merge 2 zones together, you just select 2 and you hit merge. You can split, you can draw brand new, and you can also retire, which is a nice way of saying delete. And we can actually do that at the zone level, which is really useful because all of these zoning districts actually apply those parameters across the parcels. The parcels themselves are what we use to represent what's possible. So if we go down here, I'll turn on the existing buildings again. This parcel, for example, has edges. You can see that this is a side street, a front, a rear, and a side. We have some tools in here that let you just change and make sure that you're setting your edges correctly. So maybe this isn't a street, so you can say that's a side interior. But based on those edges, you'll see the zone parameters with the setbacks actually foster the buildable form. So if I back on out and I turn on, for example, an envelope example here, this is basically what you can build on that lot. You have to actually build within this, what we call buildable envelope. It's responding to the setbacks, so that's actually a rear lot line. But for example purposes, let's say this particular rear is it's actually on a street. So let's give it a side, and then we'll say it's a street, for example. So you can see you can actually build closer to the edge of the lot line in that case. And because it's a side street, maybe there's a 5-foot setback. So this really shows you the buildable envelope. Basically, you can think of it as like a glass. And so in that glass, you have to actually fill it with liquid. And what we're calling liquid in this case are buildings. So we actually can use that as the potential build out. But until you actually apply a building type, you don't actually get the form of what's possible. So these are building types that are applied to those lots. In this case, if I go in to this particular one, you'll see this is a mid-rise office and retail. These can be configured. Just like the zones, what you're able to do is actually design your own building types. Again, they come default. There's a whole list of default building types. But within each part here, you're able to set a minimum and maximum number of floors. So this one, for example, could go up to about 4 floors of office and 1 floor of retail. So if my zone allows for me to go that high, it'll actually go up to the maximum number of floors that's possible. And you can also have towers and podiums. You can have footprints that actually respond to the parcel shape or try to auto-rectangle themselves based on a lot of times parcels aren't that pretty. They're not square all the time. They're triangles, they're octagons. And so you can actually force a rectangular footprint in that case to get a more plausible form. You can also have substructural parts. So in this case, you have parking. Parking can go 1 to 3 floors, for example. So in the case of how a zone is fostering that building, you can actually select a zone, for example, and if we go in here and we actually change some of the parameters here, for example, like the street setback, if we change that to 25 feet instead of 5 feet, then at a start height of 55 feet, it's going to actually step back probably the 4th and 5th floor of every building that resides in that zone a little bit back from the street. So it'll ripple through, and you can kind of see the resulting setbacks here for those that are actually on the lot edge. The building on the right here, for example, is already set back about 25 feet, so you didn't see anything happen. You can also turn on imagery, turn off the zoning boundaries, and get a sense for how that form might look to people actually walking down that street. And in Pasadena, heights are a pretty controversial issue, like in many cities. So being able to actually drop down to the ground and take a look is critical in evaluating how the height changes might look in context of, for example, existing structures that might already be there. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of, you can either start with parcels, you can go in, assign building types. Not all parcels redevelop, so we actually have tools that allow you to massively select parcels based on different suitability criteria. You can also go into the zones and test different policy choices and see how those might impact the build out on the parcel. But obviously only on those parcels that you're actually looking at in terms of redevelopment. In this case, we also have a dashboard. The dashboard will tell us population, household units, and jobs for that particular scenario. Or if we only have our one little office building selected, we can actually just look at that one. And you can see it would foster about 236 jobs based on the criteria of jobs per area. So 1 job per 300 square feet. And we can actually set those up, and space uses in general can be localized to the conditions there in the local jurisdiction or city that you're working in. The space uses, building types, zones, all of that is localized. And I should mention the language is also going to support any language that ArcGIS Online supports. So a lot of us in here might not speak English, so we took care of that as well. The building space uses here, you can see a breakdown. You can also see a breakdown of zone areas, which is useful to actually see from existing to proposed, the change between the actual square footage and maybe the FARs that might get applied throughout the area. So plans don't happen overnight. You can actually use scenarios to look at different build-outs over time, and then it can give you a sense of whether or not you're hitting targets or caps on plan areas in terms of what it can support from a local services point of view. We also have an inspector. I'm going to just touch on that real quick. If you select a parcel, you're actually able to get a breakdown of all of the different parameters that apply to that parcel, not only the building type and the criteria there, but the maximum number of floors or the FAR numbers. This will also allow you to override, so we call that a variance in the United States or just a parcel override. Otherwise, it's going to use the default coming from the zone. Or if there's an overlay, which actually there aren't any in this particular plan area, that's going to override the zone default. But if you make a parcel override, that's going to actually override both the default zone and overlays that might be applied in that case. So that's a quick overview of the tools here. I guess the last thing to touch on is maybe the environmental controls. If you did want to look at different shadow casts, that's pretty useful, especially if you're looking at existing versus a proposed scenario. Just being able to see existing shadow and then proposed shadow in the same view. We also have tools here which will let you actually slice. If you're doing this sort of work, you know exactly what this is. It's going to be a section that would actually allow you to slice through some of your buildings here, allow you to position yourself to see, for example, profile view along that street. With that, I'm going to go back to the overview. And in the case of Pasadena, as was mentioned on Monday, they actually had a 3D model submission policy since 2008. It's to actually support the review of new projects. In the city itself, they have about 4 stages of review, so it's iterative over time. And so we've actually built this to support scenarios, just like in plans, which you're able to load in and have them all assigned to that one project, which might be pulling from a permitting database to fill out the card here that you see in terms of the staff recommendations and such. You can also leverage different rendering techniques. So we released last year at the UC this sketchy edges or other more, let's say, not as hard-lined rendering techniques, so you don't have to actually show a finished building if it's still in conceptual phase. So it's a very useful tool to actually have these on demand so that you don't have to necessarily pull up SketchUp at a council meeting. You can just open up the browser and just use this instead of a slide deck, for example. With that, I'm going to go ahead and take it back to the slides. And this, we actually rendered a view out of the Raymond Avenue in which we were working. The office building would actually be on the left there. It's very important to note that Urban is just one piece of the overall workflow. When it comes to the process, Urban is the program allocation, building massing that you can do within this neighborhood planning area. But being able to take it into CityEngine, for example, or ArcGIS Pro for more advanced analysis, and many workflows that you're probably working with now involve our desktop software. You can also take it into Unreal Engine and other rendering engines to actually get out some really fantastic views, which are really more so that you can provide a good understanding of the space and the resulting form that zoning regulations would provide to a city that's undergoing redevelopment. So some top use cases, and then I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Eric to take you through the system architecture and sort of the V1 capabilities. Some of the top use cases that we've been seeing over the past year as we've been going through our early adopter phase has been definitely specific area plans and supporting this workflow of looking at zoning changes really in a more focused way throughout the city. There's also this need for modernization of zoning. So when it comes to zoning updates, a lot of jurisdictions have zoning books that are huge, and we're not seeking to cover everything. If your dog needs to be licensed, that's not a zoning consideration that we necessarily care about. We're looking for the form and the different parameters that go into producing form. And so we see this as a data model that can be leveraged to move zoning to more of a tabular format. We also see this as a great tool for communicating projects citywide. If you're in a local government, you likely have a map that showcases the different projects, at least the big ones. And you can start to actually use that and make that a 3D map. Some more advanced cases has been to support comprehensive planning when it comes to visualizing proposed form that our general land use might seek to foster. We can actually use this as a massing tool to produce these kind of visuals. Also in design review, because we can actually pull it into ArcGIS Pro and do some very advanced analysis, we can actually support more advanced review purposes. In the case of Boston, they have a shadow bank ordinance that we talked about. That had to be done for every major project that fell within a certain proximity of the park. And being able to run those geoprocessing tools and being able to take it to court at the end of the day is critical. And then the buildable lands analysis, in many states here in the US, we actually are mandated to do a buildable lands analysis. This is understanding the capacity for growth at a city or county scale because you have the state providing you with what is going to be the growth for that area. And so being able to analyze the zoning and the potential redevelopment of the city in supporting that growth is critical. So we are working on some tools that you see there in the small images that do multi-factor suitability, looking at different soft site evaluations. And when it comes to zoning, this is what we showed on stage. When it comes to Pasadena, they've had a zoning code since 1917. Zoning codes haven't always been, I guess, shown in the good light. They've been used for nefarious purposes in the past. So we're trying to make zoning a little bit better and useful at the end of the day to making our urban environments better. But we're running into the complexity issue. Today, it went from maybe 10 pages to a couple hundred, maybe 1,000 pages that are you can see in the zoning code there today. And what we seek to do is not really handle everything, but we want to pull out the few parameters that really matter and format those in so that they can be used in the modeling and scenario development that you see in urban. So this concept provides unique insight into development feasibility, and when we're talking about promoting new projects within our local governments, we need to be able to make the regulations accommodate the capitalism market that we have today, which is developers will only develop new buildings if they can actually do it and at least break even, right? If not make a profit. So we need to be able to look at development feasibility and the codes and what the codes allow for in order to promote different urban outcomes that we want. So we load those zoning codes into ArcGIS Urban, into the data model itself, which is tabular, and we actually can generate the envelope as well as the building type within that, looking at the FAR, for example, but then look at different space uses. And as you can see, urban is fundamentally mixed use, although you can have single uses in these different proposals. It allows you to actually test different mixed use scenarios. We've also set up Urban to be able to share these views throughout the organization, so we can actually selectively share plans and projects. For licensed users of Urban, basically you're able to create new plans and projects. You're able to edit, create new scenarios, but what we've done is created a database that allows you to then use the group organizational structure in ArcGIS Online, or just being able to share it to the entire organization, that internal view, the logged in view, essentially, of those plans and projects. We've also made it possible to take a plan and project and make it public. So when it comes to having a city website with all major projects, we want to be able to have that step by step. Once it's reviewed, once you're ready to share it, you can then make a limited view of plans and projects public without having to copy databases. So when it comes to the shared public view layers, this is a concept that is fundamental to ArcGIS Online, and so we're actually leveraging that. So you can have this multi-level sharing that's really useful. And to go into more detail, I'm going to hand it over to you, Eric, to take us through some of the capabilities.
Sounds good. So ArcGIS Urban version 1.0, we actually released it last week, so it's out there now. We're going to be adding it to the ArcGIS Online trial. So if you do a trial organization, you'll get access to ArcGIS Urban there. And if you have an existing organization, you can work through your account manager to get an evaluation version if you want to build on it and try it in your own organization. So it's actually out there now. So I wanted to walk a little bit through the data model that sits behind us and the workflow of actually using that data model. ArcGIS Urban fundamentally is a system of record for your zoning, your plans, and your projects. Zoning is a representation of your regulatory code, right? That's stored as tables and stored as boundaries. It's also stored as a record of the building types, which Brooks was showing, which can be applied within the zoning, and then overlays and overrides that sit on top of that. It's designed to support plan and project creation with this flexible scenario management system, so you can use it to create representations of the future. The Urban data model is administrated through the web interface and through ArcGIS Pro. It has a built-in data manager that helps you create and load data into ArcGIS Urban, and then you use Pro as a way of creating things like your 3D context or additional indicators, and you also use that as a way to administrate the users in ArcGIS Urban and the groups that have access to specific data. Once you've stood up your system of record, then your practitioners can actually use that to create new representations of the future. So you have this system of record for zoning, and then they create a new plan, and that actually creates a little copy in a kind of long transaction database where they can create this new plan or specific area plan based on those zoning regulations. And they can also change the boundaries or actually prototype new zoning regulations or prototype changes to zoning regulations and see what the impact of that is. They can also then upload projects that represent change on the ground, so actual new buildings, and share those with their colleagues throughout the organization. These plans and projects, once they're created, initially they're internally, right? So it's only the teams that are working on them that can see it. They can choose to share one of those plans and projects out to a public view. And now they can share that with people external to the organization. They can share it with specific people through an ArcGIS online identity. So they could say, for instance, my partner in an AEC company can see this proposed plan or project and give me comments and feedbacks. Or they could share it with everybody in the public to get broader feedback. This larger database of zoning can be made externally accessible. So one way to think about it is that this is actually a piece of information infrastructure for a city or a county that they share out, and then other organizations like architecture, engineering, construction companies can use that to do proposed designs against it as a way of sharing their projects. So it's a way of actually engaging with people and pulling them into this design and development lifecycle. So to talk specifically about version 1, what we've included in it. The initial one, or the initial view that Brooks showed, was the overview. And this is the interactive 3D environment where you see your plans and projects in context. So all your plans and projects across the city. You can open one of those plans and projects and you can visually compare the scenarios inside of it to try and decide which one is best or create new scenarios. Those scenarios are actually creating capacity metrics, which is what Brooks was showing on the right side in terms of dashboards. Those capacity metrics indicate kind of the performance of that, the number of jobs, the amount of population. Those are rolled up and summarized across your whole city in indicators, so you can see the impact of all your approved plans and projects and what your expected total population or your expected total jobs will be in the future. And we'll be expanding those capacity metrics in the future. In addition, you can search and filter, so you can find projects. You can search for a specific address and find all the plans and projects related to that address, or you can search for a specific name of a project. So it's a discovery tool as well, where you can find out what activity is going on. Brooks mentioned we're including some pre-authored indicators initially for the United States. We'll continue to expand that internationally with our partners. But we're also going to expand the total list of indicators we do, and we'll start adding in premium indicators from things like Business Analyst. Whereas if you have an existing access to that, you get additional indicators as well. The operations dashboard is integrated into indicators. That's how we actually create the charts and graphs on the side. So as ArcGIS Pro, we talked about administrating it. You can actually create a new indicator, publish a dashboard with a complex graphic, and then publish that whole thing as an indicator in ArcGIS Urban, and then other people can use that as context for making their decision making. So it's actually a way for GIS professionals to derive the analysis that they do and deliver value to the planners that in a way that's easy for them to use. And then of course the last component in the overview is this crowdsourced public ideas, where members of the public or members of a plan can go in and they can make a comment on anything they see in the urban environment. Now just to allay any fears here, when they make a comment, you review it, you choose to make it public. It's not instantly public, so you actually get to curate the feedback. You also have the option, because I know there are some cities out there that don't want any feedback, to disable that function if you want to. Once you go in, you can actually edit plans and projects, and there you have the planning tools. And inside that, we have the parametric zoning constraints. So that's actually the procedural rule. It's the same procedural technology that we have in CityEngine that creates representations of the envelopes of zoning, and that's impacted by overlays and exemptions that you've made on those. Those forms, those envelopes that are filled with that plausible building form, again, that's procedural technology. Right now, Brooks showed that we have the ability to conform ourselves to the shape of the parcel, or we can force rectangular. We're going to continue to expand that. So we'll have L-shaped, U-shaped, O-shaped. We'll continue to expand that so that you can actually bring custom templates of shapes into that to actually create different types of plausible forms. Those will be collected into building types. So you might have different forms associated with building types, and each of those forms might have different spaces associated with them that you can assign. So you're actually building this catalog of zones and this catalog of buildings that fill those zones, all with kind of custom parameters. Those space use types have their capacity metrics, and that's the total number of jobs, the total number of households. And so at version 1, we just have the 3, and then in the future we'll allow expansion. And then whenever you create one of these plans, it's managed as a collection of scenarios that you can flip between and compare. You can actually go in and change the geometry that this is based on, so you can actually edit parcels, edit zones, merge them, split them, create new ones. You can actually launch ArcGIS Urban in a totally blank space, create totally new zoning codes, totally new parcels, totally new zoning areas. You can actually start with nothing and then create a representation of a proposed future. And then in addition, it stores information about parcel adjacency, so you can understand whether your parcel is abutting a road, what type of road that is, and then condition things like zoning to do different setbacks. And then on top of that, we have this ability to load in a suitability map, and that suitability map represents how likely it is for a parcel to redevelop, and you can actually use that suitability map to do selection and determine what's going to be built. ArcGIS Urban also integrates with CityEngine as a design tool. So you can actually open a project or plan inside CityEngine and make changes to it. So you may actually generate a building and decide you want to refine that form, and I'm going to show that in detail in a moment. And then sync those changes back to your scenario that you have in ArcGIS Urban. CityEngine also adds some unique capabilities, so streetscape modeling, which we don't have in ArcGIS Urban. You also have all those interactive analytic tools, viewshed and connectivity analysis that you can run on top of your plans and projects. And then it's also the gateway to getting plans and projects out if you want to, for instance, author it for VR, or you want to use game engine integration to create some high-end visualization. So that came out as in 2019.0. As a beta function, and we'll finish it off as a release for 2019.1, which will be in beta at the end of August. And so specifically, it provides the advanced design tools where I can change custom forms and advanced visualization capacities. We're using it specifically for master planning, so if you want to add a significantly more detail or you want to do schematic design, the impact assessment, and then the Unreal. And there's a really nice article on the last release of CityEngine 2019, which goes into the details of it. But it's a pretty simple workflow. You import the plans and projects, and you sync your changes back. So rather than talk about it, I'm just going to show it. But I'm going to show a sped up version because the design takes a little bit of time. So we're back here in Boston. We've got one of our design alternatives, right? If I've got my plausible building forms or my diagrammatic building forms created by that procedural method. I can go in and change the zoning parameters and I get different shapes, but it's not sufficient. I want to make some refinement. So this is CityEngine. I log into ArcGIS Urban. I see the exact same interface that I'm used to seeing in ArcGIS Urban. I've got my plan. I've got my scenarios. I see the same buildings that I've authored here. And I've got a button that says import into CityEngine. Creates a new CityEngine project, creates a new CityEngine scene, brings in the core data, creates a geodatabase that actually contains all the parts that I have in my plan and project. One of those parts is these building parts, these LOD1 building parts. And so I bring those in. Here's my building floor plates. I've got a rule, same rule that we used in ArcGIS Urban, right? Creates the same shape. So now I've got my blue buildings. And now I want to refine those and I want to make changes. And there's a couple ways I can do that. I can go in and select a building and I could totally replace it. So maybe I've got something I've created in SketchUp and I've exported it as a Collada model and I bring that in, or if an architect has done something in an Autodesk product and give it to me as an FBX model. And I can drop that in a reference and scale it. I can select other polygons and change their uses. So I delete these towers and I add in a green space. And then I have these additional capabilities that don't exist in Urban natively, such as sketching streets. So I can go in and actually draw some streets around my design to add some details to better understand the transportation. And again, in CityEngine, right, I can apply procedural rule streets to create a kind of a more compelling representation of those that actually has textures. So here, drop a rule onto it, right? We can see the sidewalks and the walkways. Oh, little edit to fix there. So snap those together. Then I can actually sketch in new buildings. So I could create totally custom forms. Draw a podium and create a round tower, draw another podium, create a square tower out of it. I'm creating very simple shapes. These are multi-patches that would live inside the planner project, right? But I'm applying a rule to it to give them this compelling architectural detail and make them kind of visually more stunning. Add in another little garden space here next to these buildings. Start kind of fleshing out my total design. But you can see this is a tool for taking the simple thing that you've created in Urban, refining it and making it more and more compelling. And it's the same interactive experience for editing that we've had for quite some time in CityEngine. Once I've got my design refined, what do I want to do with it? There's a couple things I can do with it. I can select all these models, right? I can export them and share them and publish them back as a scenario inside my plan or project. Or I could take them a different direction. So I could take them out, bring them into something like Unreal Studio, and actually start authoring a more compelling visual experience around it. So maybe I want to use this to create an animation, and I'm going to take that animation and then publish it in a site on ArcGIS Hub as a way of expressing what this planner project is about to the people who are going to review it. So it's just another way of sharing a plan or a project.
And I should mention here as well, for those not familiar with one of these game engine technologies, they are free unless you create the next big game. So don't go creating Fortnite or something with CityEngine, but if you do use it, it is a free software.
Yeah, you can export the videos from it for free. They only charge if you distribute. One thing I just wanted to call out is that we've been working with a lot of customers with Urban and with CityEngine, and we've been developed a kind of a core library of site design tools that actually create the exact same reports that we have in ArcGIS Urban, but in CityEngine, and those are actually available online for free if you want to try the rules that we've been using. So I just want to talk briefly about what's next for ArcGIS Urban, our vision. First is my safe harbor statement. Objects that appear here may be farther away than they appear. This is my generic statement. Immediately you look at this diagram and you're going to look at the columns and the release dates. Let's ignore that for a minute. I want to talk about this left to right. So in version 1.1, which we're planning on coming out in December, we're going to allow you to take any scenario in a planner project and save it as a web scene. And the reason why we're doing that is so you can take that web scene and wrap it in a story map, or you can take that web scene and publish it as an SLPK and then share it on Google Earth. It's a way for you to take that scenario out. But this is kind of an experience of sharing that we're going to continue to expand. So at 2.0, we're going to add camera animations so that you can actually custom for each plan or each scenario, author a little experience so when someone enters it or opens it, you can guide them through the first steps of the first time they're seeing it before they're just given the free form. And then we're actually going to move one step further and build custom templates for story maps around this. So this is a sharing experience that we're talking about here. The next one is APIs and SDKs. So we're actually going to allow people to create and publish things inside ArcGIS Urban. That's actually a 2-release story. We're actually working with our professional services teams who are actually building solutions on top of ArcGIS Urban that expand its capability. At 2.0, we're going to release that for partners to actually build their own solutions on top of it. For instance, someone could build a computational fluid dynamics extension, see Royal here, on top of ArcGIS Urban that could actually provide analytics. And then that'll actually lead to partner integration where partners can build their own solutions on top of ArcGIS Urban and provide their own analytical capabilities. At version 1.1, we're going to be supporting building scene layers as projects. So when you actually put in a building scene layer in a project, you're going to get the same sort of controls you're used to seeing in terms of controlling floors and view types from Revit models inside the building scene layer. That's going to continue to expand into a project designer where you can actually go in and drag in any 3D model and georeference it and place it inside of a project at 2.0. And then we'll continue to expand on those capabilities and expand it into advanced editing, where you actually will be able to do the drawing sketching that I showed in CityEngine, but you'll be able to do it directly in ArcGIS Urban as a way of creating projects. So here I derail. This isn't a continuous story. One request that we've been consistently getting in is a street level view. People want to be able to click in one location, be able to drop themselves around and then look around from that location so that they can put themselves in the plan and project context. The next two, though, are about advanced procedural modeling. This is basically expanding our capability to do things like conditional zoning, the really complex zoning codes from folks like the Urban Redevelopment Authority of Singapore. We need to expand our capabilities to support those. The next story is about sharing. So being able to take graphics out of it, export screenshots from ArcGIS Urban and use them in reports. Then be able to take actually the reports and the metrics and get a pre-authored PDF out of that and then use that. And then actually being able to export experiences. And what I mean by that is actually being able to take a planner project and put it out directly out to virtual reality. The next one is all about collaboration. So push updates. When you're in Urban and you make a change, you see it in real time. When you make a change, you see it in real time so that we turn this into a collaborative editing framework. Then we're actually going to expand that by adding in roles for the teams so you can actually build teams around projects and have review workflows for projects and plans that are formalized inside the planner project itself. And then that'll actually link out to hub link templates so that when I go into a project and I say, okay, my team, we need to hold a public meeting on August 7th, I'm actually going to launch a hub initiative template called public meeting, and that's going to populate the data from Urban into the template and then stand up a page that I can use to engage that meeting, get feedback from that meeting, and then that goes into the planner project. We're going to be adding new plan types, land use plans, and transportation plans. We're going to be expanding our suitability analysis. We'll actually be building overlay suitability in ArcGIS Urban and use that to do allocation of different building types, adding in block typologies later. ArcGIS Enterprise Service Support will be our first step, and then an on-premise version for ArcGIS Enterprise. And then just general data enhancements, adding in support for local coordinate systems, and then adding in support for masking and clipping of integrated mesh once that's part of the larger product.
Thank you, Eric. So just a couple words on getting started. So we did release last Wednesday, and so you can definitely come up here. We'll talk to you about how to get started with a trial evaluation. We can also just schedule a follow-up to go into more detail about certain projects that you might have for using it. Our professional services team did package a nice little launch kit. So if you're familiar with Esri's launch kit program, it's a deployment program so that you actually get stood up with initial operating capabilities in your own environment. We do a data preparation and kickoff and actually have Urban stood up. So it's a really great way to get started. It's really these 4 steps. Essentially, the base data preparation is all around zoning. Depending on the complexity in your local zoning codes, some are already tabular, some aren't. Some have 12 zones, some have 30. But being able to do that base data prep is key. Then application deployment, some example scenario configuration, and then either a remote or on-site knowledge transfer and workshop regarding that. We'll also have a live training seminar next week, so it's the week after UC, I believe 18th, which is Thursday if I'm not mistaken. It'll be given over 3 times over a single day. And also this link will point you to that. It's free of cost, it's part of our education program. Also I have a manila envelope, so purely for convenience, if you want to put your business card in here, we'll send out the link, as well as links to other URLs that we showed here in the presentation today. And with that, we wanted to thank you for joining us. We'd be happy to take questions as well, and if you would please give us feedback in the app, please do so. And I hope you have a great rest of the week and enjoy the UC. And are there any questions? Yeah.
How is it licensed?
Sure. So it's actually an extension ArcGIS Online. It's an extension to the creator user type, which is the general editing user type, and it is a term license. So depending on the distributorship that you might reside in, you can check the actual licensing cost. It's also for the 2 years starting this year. We have an actual promotion. When you purchase Urban, you actually have CityEngine available as well for that particular named user. That's a 2-year promotion, and it's a great way to actually test the integration piece between Urban and CityEngine. We realize those are more advanced workflows, but we do want to make it easy to get started there. Oh, thanks.
Do you have that available for enterprise?
So Enterprise will probably be a 2.0 release, or probably around UC next year is what we're imagining. And it'll probably be, we're not sure how quickly the phasing. The first one will be support for enterprise services. The second one will be a fully on-prem version.
Yeah, you had said that base data primarily uses zoning data, but what about like existing land use and like the number of dwelling units, existing FAR and building square footage?
Yep.
How does that, at least to create a base scenario?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so you can get started with this sort of zoning light, otherwise known as general plan, but dwelling units per acre is something that you can actually work with. You don't actually have to use all the parameters that we showed, which can be filled if you do want to. You can actually use it to go there. When it comes to the space uses, they're relatively similar to the land use types that you would have, but we do go into more detail with space use. It's more to have the programmatic representation of what you're allocating, because we do recognize that residential has multiple forms. You have residential that is a single family home, and then you have affordable housing, multifamily that's economy versus premium, however you want to call it in your local jurisdiction. So we do make it so that it can be configured to be related to your land use. And we're explicitly adding land use in an upcoming release very soon to actually have that as a hierarchy above zoning, so that you can look at different compliance and relationships there. But we do realize it's also a separate process many times. So once you load in your land use as building types, then typically that and the allowable building type space uses that can be assigned to the zones in urban can also go into to actually have that relationship already in there and available.
Could you speak more to how it shows current proposed transportation infrastructure? Because of course that's such a big part of the conversation around changes in land use.
Yeah. So when it comes to, for example, Civil 3D, or you're just asking how this might relate to some transportation planning forecasting.
Like the metro line as well
Yep.
as like different like sidewalk widths, just like how you might kind of integrate that into some of these like land use models.
Yeah, sure. So it's integrated in two ways. First and foremost is as context. So being able to take in existing mapped assets and improvement plans, that can be brought in as context to the planning environment in which you're working in, that is replicated basically over all scenarios. That's what you have seen there. What we're also able to do though is take the outputs of each scenario, which is basically a parcel with square footage of space use, not even land use, right? You could normalize it to a TAZ, but you can also just use it as a parcel and take that scenario into forecasting tools or ArcGIS Pro. And there are some partners of ours that do that. So there's really you can bring it in as context, and you can also use some of the outputs of Urban to look at different impacts and scores there. And we're working with partners, as Eric mentioned, with the API coming up. We do want to be able to open up this to develop, trip generation algorithms or different highest and best use pro forma outputs. So that's where we want to go. Yep.
Two questions. So first, is secondary or induced job creation considered? And secondly, how about parking requirements for different uses? Can we show how those are changing?
You want to take the parking?
Yeah, so the parking requirements, parking demand as a capacity metric is one that we want to work on. But there's I guess, two additional parts of that. One is being able to have shared parking requirements across multiple things, which would be an analytical solution. So we'd actually build that as kind of an indicator where each property would have a supply and demand factor, and then we would kind of summarize those up for different areas. The second one is the procedural component. So being right now inside of a building type, there is a parking type. So when we have a parking demand metric, we'll have a supply metric that meets demand. So you can allocate underground parking or inside parking. But what we really want to do is we want to get to the optimized scaling of the building so that when you put in that requirement, it actually reduces the size of the building based on the type of parking that you've allocated inside of it.
So maybe I can attempt to say that another way as well. So the ability to drop a larger building and have the parking respond is usually what the requirement is that what we receive. We do, however, also already have parking as a space use that can be allocated so that you can manually match and make sure you have parking square footage and lots per space use that you already have in your plan. So same with green space. I mean, if you consider green space also as a space use, you can have it as the first floor space use or top floor space use or the only space use on a lot. So being able to have building types, for example, above ground parking, below ground parking, just lot parking, surface parking rather. You can already do that. It's just not going to auto-calculate and get those balances for you, but we are working on that, definitely. And then the other question was? Interesting. It sounds like a report that you could create, but it's not something that we currently have out of the box. What we can do, though, because everything in Urban is fundamentally on ArcGIS Online as a feature, you're able to go ahead and filter by scenario and take those out into Operations Dashboard and create any chart you'd want. That and desktop as well, because everything's web services. So what we represented here in our charts is really the base, the foundational summaries that can be used to fuel other statistical reports. The ability to look at jobs is going to really depend on how detailed you go in your space uses as well. because some space uses actually have more jobs than others, right? Yeah, everything's tabular in the back end. You can just export it out. Yep. And also, I should mention the existing conditions is something also would be calculated in there as tabular. So whenever you replace an existing building, you have a deficit basically of maybe if you replace a residential building, you have to replace it with a new residential building and fill that deficit that was created initially. So the tables do show that. We had it on a Samsung S7 yesterday.
Yeah,
Phone. We don't recommend the phone, but tablets are good. For the overview, typically because we've designed it to be embeddable, the embeddable view is something that can be viewed on mobile pretty easily. When it comes to the editing tools, that's something you'll want to just test out depending on the mobile device you want to use.
But if you look at the desktop browser requirements, it'll match the web scene viewer and the JavaScript API. You don't need anything beyond that. So the only constraint is the level of detail that the scene layers can support. So if you can publish it as a scene layer, you can consume it in ArcGIS Urban.
And if there are any other questions, feel free to email us as well. Oh, there's one more. And just a reminder, for convenience purposes only, we don't actually know even how to get these into our marketing system. So we'll send you the links if you leave your business card. One more question?
An involved one. So I mean, we have some customers that have made that move, and yeah, you have to spend the time to translate that to a set of tables, and it can be pretty involved.
But start off with how you represent zoning today. So some cities keep all of their parameters for height on an overlay versus the zoning district itself. Mm-hmm. So you'd have to first start with the geometries in which you store it as unique layers, so that then you can fill out the overlays necessary. And then probably the last step would be to look at the zoning districts and enter in the land uses and setbacks that way.
But is that all stuff that we're going to be doing right into Urban, or is there some pre-work that we need to get done before?
Honestly, there's a big business out there to rewrite zoning codes, and Esri is not in that business. What we recommend is maybe engaging with one of our planning firms that are partners of Esri, we're working with them because they're very interested in urban as well, and that's their forte. They actually help with that modernization of zoning code, but that is a big lift for many local jurisdictions because it involves council voting on it and getting it into law essentially, because they are legal documents. So what we would recommend is just based on what you have today, really just pull out, because what we're talking about here is not too complex when it comes to the data model, just the FAR numbers, the setbacks, the maximum heights, number of dwelling units, floors. We can start to just pull out these very fundamental parts of the zoning code as a start, because again, what you see many times is this, the zoning code covers much more than what we're doing here. We're not really looking at Airbnbs and whether or not you're allowing for them, or nanny flats or anything like that. We want to basically pull out the parameters that matter to the form and what might be generated in terms of a 3D building mass, right?
And I will say customers have taken, when they've tackled complex codes, two approaches. One is trying to translate everything at once, which is pretty daunting. And in some cases, they've just picked the specific plan area that they're interested and only translated the 5 codes that they're interested in for doing that plan, and then do a piecemeal approach as they tackle new zones.
But once you have all of your zones in here in this data model, part of what we've been seeing at this conference is just the kind of plethora of other apps that you can create from it. I mean, imagine creating a web app builder where you just click a parcel and you get a breakdown of FAR and setback criteria. Not everyone has that. I mean, only the sort of top tier users that we've seen have even gone there with zoning codes in our GIS databases. So once we get there, there's a lot more than just urban that can use that rich data. Yep.
Are there any case studies on your buildable land analysis that are out there already?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't written a case study explicitly, but if you'd want to come talk down at the showcase, we have at the Urban Showcase, there's a booth called Urban Labs, which is actually the team working on that buildable lands analysis. But if you want to talk to like Seattle and see sort of what their plan is for implementing that, they can walk you through it for sure.
Could you say something about terrain and maybe how to show future terrain? For example, if you have a graphic model that changes.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so when I actually pulled up that model in the view there, I actually have it still there. Each scenario in Urban, if we go to configure and we look at the scenario itself, is actually defined by a web scene. So what we're proposing is that you actually configure that web scene to represent all changes within that scenario, which may actually include changes to the terrain. So in Urban, you actually load in, by default, the Esri terrain for the entire world, and then on top of that, you can have your more detailed citywide terrain, but then even within individual projects, if there are modifications, those just need to be published as terrain elevations in the actual project scene for each iteration. And I'm going to have to wrap it up because the next presenters are going to want the stage, but we will be downstairs in the showcase area. There is an ArcGIS Urban showcase, and we'll invite you all to come down and talk to us. Thanks. And we also still have this envelope up here if you'd like to. Thanks.